something. Don't call them up. They'll tell you it was for one half percent of everything.
It was for one of every record.
Yeah.
Little did you realize at the time.
Plus, it was about as simple a form as you could get. It fit on one piece of paper.
Well, I looked at the
Yeah.
deal yesterday.
About 3 or 4 paragraphs.
Yeah. Yeah.
You were going to say something else. Oh, with that regard to that grant project, we didn't present ourselves purely as a private enterprise that was there for commercial purposes.
Government money.
By no means. I mean, we indicated that we were, doing a research project with the support of the National Endowment for the Humanities and all that kind of stuff. So we probably came on somewhat as a Library of Congress field recorder might have once.
I think that's one of the reasons that I kept sort of harking to other things, because even though since it is a finite number of records over it's an interesting example of a part of our catalog, but for that reason it's not very typical.
Mm-hmm.
Because it is true that there were, in most other instances, we did have to go to much greater lengths to explain who we were, where we were from, what we did with the records and things like that. Not that we were grilled or anything, but we definitely did present ourselves in other situations.
To record an album is
Yeah.
one thing, but with this research thing, the worst we were asking for was to borrow some photographs and mail them back to them later. So they were trusting us with a piece of family memorabilia. But that was the most, and then, ask for their recollections.
Sure.
And I don't think that, I don't recall that we asked them to sign agreements so much as we told them that we would be sending them royalties. I don't know, we could look in the file and that question would answer itself. I think it was more like we wrote a promise to them that we would pay them rather than that we asked them to sign something the other way around.
I know that an NEH grant today requires a virtual PhD dissertation with academic, letters of reference and what have you. Do you have to go through a lot of money to get that money? And who were your sponsors? Who were your...
Let's see, who was the head of, it wasn't NEA anyhow, it was NEH.
NEH, no.
And I think Beth Lomax Hawes was the head of the NEH at that point, right?
I don't know.
I'm quite sure that she was. At least I remember meeting her during that period
Well,
of time.
that was a simple
Beth
form.
Hawes was the head of the folk arts division of the NEA. She was the first. And back at that time,
Yes,
that's what she would have been. But whether she had corresponding duties at the NEH, I don't know. They were created by the same legislation, and they sat in the same place. And they weren't here.
It was a very simple form, but it was bureaucratic.
Yeah.
But it was.
And it was academic. We had
It was
to
maybe 4 pages or something like that. It wasn't.
Did you have to get some
and-
recommender or something?
It was. I think we had a couple people, maybe Carl Goldstein or
maybe
Joe
even
Hickerson
Spotswood or
somebody.
someone like that, or Dick or
Yeah.
Alan Tabor.
It would be on file if we
Yeah.
get into it, of
Yeah.
course. But we don't have a copy as far as I
Yeah.
know. But
Right.
they probably could find one down there.
Although, wasn't it because of that that we started the Society for Traditional Music, or was that later?
Yeah, later, a little bit later.
Because we did think that we might do that again. It was an enjoyable experience, even though it dragged on. But then we felt that we should have a nonprofit organization in order to be able to do anything like that in the future. So we did incorporate a nonprofit organization called the Society for Traditional Music.
Was this down in Ithaca?
No, this is when we were all here living in Somerville by that time. So.
Are you looking for something in particular?
I was just trying to see if I could ever figure out when we first had a lawyer that we talked to, but it might have been 10 years.
What's your most, going back to that first, I don't care particularly, half dozen years or so, what do you recall as, and I mean this question to be as a Rorschach blot or a word association, what's your most, exciting, emotional project in your first, half dozen years of existence? What struck you? What do you think, thinking back now, what strikes you the most as something that's sent a thrill for you to do?
Well, I think in terms of aesthetically and artistically, there were several high points. I would say that in terms of having a feeling that we were doing something that was really important for the music and that was kind of pioneering, though, and the thing that musically also excited the most during the early years was the J.D. Crowe record. Now, doing Norman Blake's first record was also a really exciting point for me as well. In terms of...
we didn't do that. We put it out.
Yes, but just the
The
moment
Bruce
I
Kaplan.
heard it, it was like,
Yeah.
oh, this is going to be so wonderful
Yeah.
to have this on radio. But also country cooking, just because we'd heard those guys for quite a while in Ithaca. And we also had Red Allen and Frank Wakefield come to Ithaca to play at Cornell for the Ithaca area Friends of Bluegrass and Old Time Country Music. And that was, I mean, to me, Red Allen, who had been with the Osborne brothers and had done some really classic recording, that to me was also just chilling, absolutely chilling. Of course, it was very difficult once you actually were in contact, close contact. Like, I can't remember if Red actually stayed over at Kent in my house in Ithaca, but I think he did, and he was, you know, it's like he was making phone calls and out long distance and not telling us about them. And
Smoking up a storm.
Smoking up a storm and changing the terms, saying he needed more money to be paid more money and stuff like that. So it's like all of your worst nightmares from the side of the producers or the record company, particularly if you're underfunded and just starting off an enterprise, to have to deal with someone that you previously had kind of idolized, to see that they had very big feet of lots of clay. And somebody else whose house we did stay at and sleep on the floor too was Frank Wakefield, who was living outside of Saratoga Springs, New York. And it's something that reminds me, maybe it was a trailer or something, but it was like really way back in the woods and very sort of funky and stuff. And I remember Kent and I sleeping on the floor at Frank Wakefield's house, and he did very strange things. He baked his mandolin in the oven, for example.
We've talked about J.D. Crowe. What was it about getting the Norman Blake record that excited you so much?
Well,
he was in some ways a professional by your standards.
Well, he
wasn't
definitely
As
was.
Crowe,
That
but
was
what-
that was no, more so than Crowe, because you know, he was the little figure when the Johnny Cash show was nationally televised, who was always sitting on the stool playing his guitar. Plus, he had been on the very successful John Hartford record, who was on a major label at that time.
This is sideman's of that Bob Dylan album.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he definitely was someone that, and yet he had more of a, at least speaking for myself, I felt that he had more of the kind of consciousness or relationship with the music that I could identify with people of our age. So it was also exciting from that point of view. Plus, he was just so damn good and doing things that nobody else could do or could touch. And you know, there were only a couple of people even playing anything vaguely like that back then. So it was very, very exciting, that first record.
I mentioned yesterday that the Snuffy and Pappy one was one that really impressed me at first, because it was essentially our third album. It came out the same month as two other albums, but we didn't even know they were live. I can remember now that we were someplace in maybe West Virginia or Washington, someplace around there, in the car driving around, and somehow we came to know that they were alive and still well. I think we assumed that they died like 10 or 15 years earlier. And then we, called them up and said, let's make a record, and they agreed to do it. And then actually going into a real recording studio for the first time, making a record of people that were, because we didn't make the George Pegram record.
Right.
It was kind of like the first real record that we did, that was, we were creating something that was, nobody had done for years with them, and it came out very well too.
Plus, so many people, because we did a lot of interviewing before that in the H grant too, and they would be with people like Steve Ledford, or was the guy over in Asheville, the Somebody Brothers. Or Wiley and Zeke Morris.
Yeah.
Yeah, Wiley and Zeke Morris. And so many people had said that Snuffy was a seminal three-finger style banjo player. One of the first and most inspiring and exciting ones that had influenced them, including Earl Scruggs. So it's true that in a way that not only finding that they were still around and in good shape and could make this record was exciting, but also to sort of have a record by someone who was such an important kind of transitional figure from old time to modern bluegrass.
Bill Nowlin, call the operator, please. Bill Nowlin.
Okay.
Hi, Ken.
Ken Irwin is now in the building.
Is he talkable?
He's talkable.
No, you got to let him speak for himself, or he'll get upset about it.
Not right now.
You got a big cluster in the spring, early summer of '77. I mean, it looks like.
That's the year that George Thorogood's first record came out, too.
Okay, but this looks like it might have been just before that. Look at this, starting in May, June, July of '77. You've got an enormous number of records. What are some of the things that were going on there? Do you know what any of those were?
You know what all of them were.
Okay, tell me what some of those were and what you recall them.
That little batch in the...
May, June, July '77. There's a huge cluster of records there.
Well, the first one is Early Shaker Spirituals. That was an album a guy named Daniel Patterson from University of North Carolina put together of actual shakers in Sabbath Day Lake, Maine.
My home state.
We're actually doing a follow-up to that that'll be out in October this year, some 22 years later. But they're authentic shakers, singing shaker music, as opposed to what usually has happened, which is other people
Singing
performing shaker songs.
These are recordings you obtained?
Yeah, he had made them himself, and then he wrote some notes. I know I went up and visited and took some photographs at one point there.
And that was pretty exciting, too, because the Shakers have long been recognized for their craftsmanship and their architecture. But it's sort of like their actual culture, nobody really knew that much about unless you were purely academically interested in it.
The famous quote from Sister Mildred Barker, she was, I think, 90 when I visited there. She said, "I don't want to be remembered as a chair."
Yeah.
That was her.
That's great.
And it's interesting, too, because Bill was just saying 22 years later, here we are doing another one. Well, in the last 2 years, there's been, it's like a lot of these things that kind of goes in waves. In the last 2 years, there were 2 memoirs published with women who had lived with, like during the time that they were, say, in college or high school, with some of the last remaining Shakers, because there still is a little Shaker community, minuscule, in Canterbury, New Hampshire. And so there's some of the little, not infighting, but differences between communities, between the Sabbath Day Light community, which is just over the border of Maine, and the Canterbury one, which is in New Hampshire. And then there's now much more attention. I can't remember if it's a state park or what, but the one that's in western Massachusetts that has the round barn that is like...
There's Fruitlands.
Yeah.
That's
no,
in Harvard.
This is the one that's out in Hancock or something.
Mm-hmm. Hancock Shaker Village.
The big round barn is there.
Does the upcoming follow-up come from the same group of recordings, just more?
No. It's recorded by a guy out in Cleveland but they were recorded in New Hampshire and Maine, and they were recorded in the 60s. I think these were actually slightly earlier recordings that he put out. A very interesting guy. He also, he was, besides recording the Shakers, he was also the guy that first brought Elvis to national television. And he also...
Well, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Was a shaker.
Well, the song he performed was Shake, Rattle, and Roll, in fact. So that's interesting connection there. He also had Malcolm X working as an assistant for him at one point, because he was in Michigan at the time. It's kind of
What's the next one?
combinations. Well,
The owner remembers his chair. See, that's priceless. I never would ask about that record.
right. The next record in May, there were 4 other records. One was a reissue of old Columbia recordings of Lester Flatt and Earl Scruggs. Another was the second volume of Mud Acres, which we call Woodstock Mountains. There was a group called Jeffrey Fredericks and the Clam Tones. That was a kind of a follow-up recording to an earlier album we'd put out called Have Moisey, that had 3 different groups on it. Michael Hurley, Unholy Modal Rounders, and Jeffrey. This was his own album. And then this one I can't actually remember, 7008. It's one of the Cape Breton fiddle albums, but I don't remember which one. It's between Graham Townsend and Dougie McPhee and before Tommy Doucette, but I just can't remember which one this was. I think
Graham's
707. Yeah.
This is something that did you guys do this recording?
Mark Wilson.
Winnie,
No, she's 7012. I can remember. Seems like I can remember every other one in the series, but this one we can look it up. So.
Mark Wilson. How did you encounter him?
At one of the very first Boston area friends of bluegrass and old time country music.
Is that how you actually met him?
Shows, yeah. We had a record table set up, and we just had the 2 records out at that time.
He was a doctoral candidate at Harvard.
Yeah.
In philosophy.
And then I think they saw him again at the Boston Blues Society show. But the first, he was in that second year at some point. The next month we put out the third Joe Val album. First Tony Rice album. Second Gid Tanner and the Skillet Lickers reissue. Frank Hovington, who was an acoustic blues singer from Delaware.
Well, he's originally from the Delta and had been living in Delaware, and it turned out that he was someone that George Thorogood was a big fan of also, which we didn't know at the time. But, I mean, in fact, that was probably more impressive to George than anything else that we could have done as a company. Because at that time, I mean, it's true that at that time the record business was far less systematized and rationalized and in every way than it is now. And the only 2 companies that George himself had wanted to send demo tapes to were Arcady and us. And it was because of the records that we all do.
He didn't want to send demos to majors?
No. No, he had no interest in them.
He wanted to be independent.
Okay.
Of course, he may also have figured that would be a waste of time, too, but who knows. But he, he talked a lot about independence.
There were certainly other people who told him that he should, and in fact, a guy who did record him early on sent tapes to MCA and places like that, and told him he was going to be a big star and all of that. But that wasn't really George and Jeff Simon, the drummer, who had known George for a long time. That really wasn't their way. So they weren't all that. I mean, they didn't want to be big rock and roll stars in particular.
They claimed that they wanted to record so they wouldn't have to go and audition at all these clubs, which is the way they did it back then.
Yeah.
We put out an Eric Schoenberg album. He's a finger-style acoustic guitar player who lives around here. The next month was the first George Thorogood album, so you can sort of see the context of what we were putting out at the same time. Dan Crary album, the second album of John Miller that we spoke about yesterday. This was more of a kind of a show tunes type of album that he did. A woman named Anne Romaine, who was a Southern. She was very active in the movement and wrote a lot of songs about organizing and conditions.
What was the nature of the record? Was it political?
Yeah, country
and political. Yeah.
And she also, I think, more important than being an artist, she put together a series of tours down south, which commingled Afro-American and white artists, which was not done at the time. And Bernice Reagan was on her board, and Hazel Dickens and Alice Gerard, and I think Louis Balsam, and she had, Ralph Stanley touring with Mabel Hillary or Bernice Reagan, and I think Bessie Jones, and that she had all kinds of people, the Balsas, and I think she actually had 2 songs on that album that were recorded with the Balsa brothers backing her up. She's very eclectic and a very strong-minded person. She was working on her thesis, I think, when she died a few years ago, ruptured a fundus.
I was going to ask if she was still around.
She's a very small person, too. She's out there. She could have gotten herself killed easily enough. She was in the front lines of a number of things.
They did have situations where people would come up and bump the back of their cars while they were traveling. Not quite knocked them off the road, but just made it pretty clear. Reverend Crowley Brown was on a lot of her tours.
Where were you getting the money for these things? I mean, were they selling enough to let you do this? That's a lot of releases. I'm looking at.
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't until, was it 75
Five.
that we started taking salaries?
Yeah, this was 77. It was
Yeah.
5 and 5 and 5. Like 15 albums in 3 months.
Yeah, it just visually it's kind of striking there in that cluster.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
if you realize that we didn't take salaries for the first years, for most of the time, Bill had a legitimate job. Marion was working and bringing in some money. I did for a short while, and we were living very cheaply, eating a lot of peanut butter and.
You were still living
popcorn
together
and- yeah.
collectively. Okay.
Up through 77, I think, yeah. So, when we owned the house and bought food at, co-op, and had very, very minimal expense.
You bought the house?
Yeah.
Okay.
We had 124 albums out before that year even began.
Before 75?
Before 77 began. So, that's a lot of records that were themselves. I think every record was profitable in the earlier years for a long, long time. So they were, to one degree or another, that is, but all those records were bringing in some degree of income. Plus, we were distributing other companies' records at the same time. And
were you doing largely your own distribution at the time, or were you dealing with other distributors?
so we had quite a network by that time.
Early on, I think I mentioned that we started doing our own, and then we added Jack's Record Seller, and then Adelphi in the D.C. area, and Eden in Minnesota, and Orwaka in Denver, and
House was around then.
House was in that second little batch in
St. Louis
in
or
the
Kansas City.
and then it went on from there.
I talked with all of you about signing Thorogood. What was how did Thorogood's success affect you internally? What kind of debates did you have, or did you have about what kind of company you were going to become, whether you should do this again, whether you should do it again with George, whether you should look for another Thorogood?
The more debates, I think, were before whether we should do it. It took us, I'd say, 6 months. George kept, trying to find out and what was going on, and I think that was more the debate. But I think that we had all seen Elektra, in particular. I think was one that we looked at and had seen how they had gotten what we considered off course, and we just didn't want to do that. I think one of the things that we saw later on with Thorogood was the nature of some of the people that when there got to be more serious money, the people that came out of the woodwork and the people who, many of whom we wouldn't want to deal with. I think there's probably another level after that when you start dealing with real professionals, but there was sort of that intermediate level that was quite distasteful. A lot of people we wouldn't want to be in the same room with.
You must have been, I would assume, you'd be approached by other people who said they were like Thorogood or as good as Thorogood or could
The next George
be
Phillips.
that successful.
Yeah.
So did that happen a lot?
There were quite a few. It weren't hundreds of them, but there were probably dozens in the next few years.
But our reaction was instinctively against that.
Yeah, because I would think that they wouldn't all be bad. Some of them might be
Yeah.
good artists. So what do you want to do?
But I think we were partly being protective of ourselves and partly being protective of George by not wanting to imitate him with somebody else, I think we had an instinct that something special was happening here, and that, just to think that we could just do it again like that would probably be foolish of us.
But we didn't have enough knowledge. It is
No,
the
we
first
didn't,
record of that sort.
but I think it was an instinct that,
very successful.
it was a very lucky thing. It wasn't just that, we were so great that we made this happen.
Yeah.
Other people helped make it happen, circumstance to being at the right time at the right place with the right thing, and that if we went and just took all our money and tried to build another one, that we'd almost certainly fail. At the same time, I think we were trying to be protective of him too, by not just bringing in a bunch of other people that were copying him and leaving him in a position of still being special to us, as opposed to just the first in a long list of other people.
Did it put strains on you business-wise to produce the records and the artwork and the?
No, because we
Get this out
only
there?
we only spent $3,000 on the recording budget, and then we spent a little more when
Less than that.
well, it got to be that because when there was no bass on it, we
Yeah.
decided to go put bass in again. It was kind of nerve-wracking a little bit, but then we had hoped to sell 3,000 copies, and our first pressing was someplace in that range. It also didn't take off instantly, and it took a long time. It was really,
It was very fortunate
quite a
in that
while.
respect. It sort of broke in California, and then broke in Denver and Philadelphia. I don't remember exactly which came first, but in Boulder. I mean, George showed up in Colorado and thought he had the wrong place because there was this line of people outside. And the local radio station had gotten on it and was playing it, and he didn't know any of those people and wondered what they were doing.
And you had anything to do with it? The local radio.
well, we managed to get them a copy because they're on a mailing list or
Okay,
something.
I see.
But we had less to do with it than probably the DJ in San Francisco that was playing it, talking to his friend in Denver.
Sure. I mean, obviously you'd get them a copy of the record.
Right.
That's how they had it. But did you
Yeah.
have anything overt, explicit to do with
We
getting?
certainly weren't taking out ads in radio
Were you,
tipsy
were you,
publications.
were you
or-
calling people?
We would have been calling some people, yeah.
We did.
Not probably at the earliest stage we wouldn't have been actively calling people because we wouldn't have had anybody to do it hardly.
Yeah.
It was the timing of it. It just sort of built organically, rather than a tremendous thunderclap of some kind. Because we couldn't finance pressing the record.
That's what I was wondering.
We suddenly got an order for 100,000
No,
copies.
it was like here and then there, something that
The
like
money came in,
outbreaks,
and
yeah.
then just as the time the money came in, we get a bigger order, and there was just enough to do that. And it built like that. I mean, we would have been in tough shape otherwise.
So you managed it.
And
You ever-
fortunately, it didn't happen the other end, too, that suddenly, the day we decided we were going to press 200,000 copies to be ahead of demand, the boom, it just died.
Right.
That's wait till the third record.
The third record that happened, yeah.
So did you ever reach a situation where you couldn't get the records out, or you always managed to?
No, not really. We've had more trouble sometimes since with, records just being 1,000 copies short, as opposed to that particular one.
Say, we're
Probably
talking.
a few days when we were slow or something like that. But people didn't expect the same kind of instant service that they expect now either.
Talk to everybody about signing Thorogood. Did you have any particular feelings about not signing another Thorogood, or watching where you were going, or are we going to now do something that's more like Rounder than Rounder has ever been to remind ourselves of what Rounder has to be?
No. I don't think that any of the three of us were particularly insecure about that one way or the other. We definitely had feelings that we didn't want to. In fact, I would say that in general, of all of the dozens of tapes and managers publishers who called us with artists who they all said were going to be the next George Thorogood, that if anything, that was a red flag that probably wasn't true, first of all, and second of all, it was not like we were going to try to duplicate that success by finding another band exactly like George, which is something that has since happened with Alison Krauss, because I'm sure this person can be as big as Alison Krauss, and it would always, because those really weren't the reasons we signed them in the first place, because we thought they were going to be so as huge as they turned out to be.
There was another band that was very much like the Destroyers and friendly with them, the Nighthawks, but we really deliberately didn't work with them for quite a long time until the Thorogood thing was pretty much over. Just because, as I said, they seemed too similar.
And in fact, probably the band who went on to have as great success, who was formed shortly after Thorogood, opened for George at one of his dates in Colorado. I think Ken was there. The Fabulous Thunderbirds, and we didn't particularly like them.
Well, Stevie Ray Vaughan, too, was the Cobras.
Well, Stevie, we did feel differently about. We didn't try to sign Stevie, but it was right before.
But that was an outrageous amount of money. It was $125,000 would have cost to sign
And
Stevie,
and then it went up from there.
Yeah.
And then it went up from there.
But
Looking back,
it would have been a pretty good investment if we had the money.
But who could know?
Yeah.
What'd you do in the immediate, you got Thorogood recorded. 78 started off kind of busy as well in the first 3 months of the year.
Well, the company was doing really well in terms of cash flow, obviously, at that point. We were selling lots of George records, so there was never a shortage of ideas, so those were all things that had been in the pipeline or had been in the process of being worked on for probably the previous year and a half, and it's just that they happened to be able to come together then. We had money to put them out, and so we put them out.
I think we should go back to Thorogood, though.
actually 9 albums were put out that first month of 1978.
That with the first record, we all sort of jumped into areas that we hadn't been very involved with before, calling up one-stops and trying to get records in, calling up radio stations, being more aggressive with our distributors. I mean, it was a real sink or swim situation. And, we just all dove in and made calls that we'd never had done before, and cold.
I think I remember it, though, as more that as the record was obviously starting to take off and have more success, that it was more a matter of just keeping up with what people were basically thrusting at us. For example, the first independent radio promotion person we ever worked with came to us because the airplay that was getting on a particular station. And the person who was the general manager of the largest one-stop company in the country at that time, who I had met years before it aired, showed us how to do things like read radio and records. And I went to the radio and records, and then it wasn't like I was initiating this. And there were so many things that all three of us could have done to quote-unquote dive right in. But there were people who were big supporters of the record and who obviously had a lot to teach us. When we saw a direct benefit from that, then obviously we said, so this is something that we've been missing. It was stupid of us not to have Steve Leeds, who in fact, that's the first independent radio promotion person we worked with, and we had hired him. He came to us, of course, but we did hire him from Moving On Over for the second record, I think, from the time it was released.
For the first record, he and a few other people just did things
for it
because it was cool. It was sort of gratis, and they could go to these stations. And
Well, we were also so naive back then that we really did think they were just doing it because it was cool.
Yeah.
They were doing it because it was cool, and also because they hoped that it would result in them having a big like.
On Atlantic's payroll, he was calling radio stations.
Yeah.
At the same time, maybe as he was making his other calls, he'd say something about.
But I think it also helped him with the radio station.
Yeah. Yeah.
you know.
No, it really didn't, because he had people
No,
at that
turning
point
them on
who were
to-
much more. He was working with at Atlantic. He was working with some of the top 10 or 20 records in the country, and George was not one of the 10 or 20.
No, but I think it still, I think it
Country.
still helps with relationships, having somebody tell you about something
Well, it
that's
was
cool that
it
you
was
don't
a
know.
crusade, and things were sort of collapsing at Atlantic, and he went independent in between George's first record and the second. So this was, part of his starting his own independent promotion company.
What was the reaction from some of your other artists to their novel? Was very cool? I'm on a big label now. Oh my God, these guys aren't going to be able to spend any time on me, or
I think
Jesus,
what
why haven't I become a star? They didn't
That,
sell my
that was
record.
the reaction of a lot of our employees.
Pardon me? That was
the reaction of some of our employees, that these guys are not paying as much attention to me anymore. That we've been part of a tight-knit group, and suddenly we were a little more distant from them, and not part of the same small, happy family. I don't recall artists.
I remember
in
some
particular.
artists who were worried that they wouldn't
should
get
have
as
been.
much promotion, and I think that there were some artists who said, "Oh, geez, I wonder how come I haven't had this kind of success," and it's and not blaming us for it, or saying we neglecting it for George, but I don't think that most of them are very musicians that now they were with majors because George had that success, but.
John Scholl or Russ Berenberg, those would be people that you could ask, because they were albums in April and May of '79 when Moving On Over was really at its peak.
I think neither of
I
them
know.
would be good. Would be good in that neither of them were touring. I mean,
Yeah.
they're
Yeah, I know.
not good representatives.
Well, we hardly thought about whether people were touring or not back then.
You had said to me, Marion, a couple of days ago that you didn't really do any promotion before Thursday. So,
We didn't really do a lot. We only became first aware of it as a concept somewhere around '74, around the same time that we hired our first employee. And it was something that we sort of came to because some of the artists, basically sort of said, well, how are you going to let people know about our records? It's like, well, we're selling the records in stores, but we didn't think about sending them out. And I would say, I don't remember for sure, Ken might remember better than I, but it seems to me that it was around the time of, say, Country Cooking and Highland Street Band and records like that, that we realized that we sort of owed it to them.
Do you remember who it was that first sent that to us? I remember
I
somebody
don't.
said it's not just enough to put out our record.
Yeah,
I
I
want
remember
to
that
try to sell
exact
it.
phrase, but I don't remember who it was.
Yeah.
And it could have been Norman Blake, because he knew about promotion, because he'd been on the John Hartford record, or Amwood in Nashville, or it could have been Country Cooking, or it could have been the Highland String Band. Because Highwoods was, they were very, they were more, they were ahead of a lot of other bands in that regard, because they were, trying to make.
It would have been Walt, because he's the only one that would have articulated something like that, and I certainly don't remember.
No, what's his name? The
Not
guy.
Walt, Doug.
Doug, yeah.
That's what I was going to say, Doug Dorshow, or someone like that. But and so we became aware of it then, but we didn't really learn how it worked. Even the most basic sense of how the actual mechanics worked, I would say, until we were sort of thrown into the water and sink or swim of it, which is my image of that more than our diving in. It's more that we were there, and it was a matter of sink or swim. And we rose to the occasion sufficiently to learn a lot about the mechanics and how it would work, and then did as much as we could afford to do.
I remember being specifically challenged by Flying Fish when Bruce broke off,
Yeah, I think that's great.
and actually was getting more attention than we were for some of his records, and noticing, first of all, that he was trying harder and that we had to kind of catch up deliberately, and secondly, that he was choosing his artists in a way that we still don't do sometimes, but he was deliberately picking artists that had booking agencies that were out there and touring, as opposed to just, oh, it would be cool to put out this artist. And then Philo did the same thing a little bit later, too, in another way that came on. and made a kind of an impression in a certain area.
Yes, well, they had, when was their big Mary McCaslin success?
I don't know the year, but
It was like a little before Thoroughbred, wasn't it, as I recall?
I don't know, it might have been.
It was during the time that there was this daytime AM station in Cambridge that played a lot of the big sort of folk and pop crossover hits, like the Steely Dan's of the world. And they also played a lot of an artist named Mary McCaslin, who was on Philo. And Mary was one of the first folk stars to sort of have the kind of success for that period that would later turn out to be the major kind of success of someone like a Suzanne Vega. And she made records that were still folky but slightly more pop sounding. And as she was packing in coffee houses, the same ones that later on people like Tracy Chapman and Suzanne Vega and Sean Colvin would play and pack, but the difference of 10 plus years or something in between. And could they wound up having national radio hits on pop radio, whereas she had national radio hits on this network of stations. Network, I don't mean anything for ownership or anything, on the CAS and daytime sort of folk shows that really did result in a lot of particular record sales.
I think we sold like 4,000 copies.
And we were the redistributed
in this
Philo.
area in the Cambridge market off the John Stark.
Is that right?
Yes.
Which
Yeah.
was a huge amount at that time. For one market.
But there were a lot of people who listened only to that station. They didn't like listening to the big rock station in town, which was WCCM. And it was before some of the college radio stations had kind of matured to the level that they have now. So they kind of, and then eventually three of us told it was not all that financially solid, but it was a major station, and stars like the Stevie Williams of the world would all go there and do commercial things when they had major concert dates in Boston. So it was like it was that significant station. And we had lots of friends at WCAS, but we were distributing Philo at that time. So we saw how Philo worked in the Catholic records, and we saw the effects of that. And I think CAS even played Thoroughbred. That was some of the folkier cuts on it when it first came out, because that was the end of when they introduced it, I think.
The McCaslin success was when? 74, did he?
We
I know,
can't pin
slightly-
down as
Yeah, it was probably like 76 or 77.
Okay.
My recollection is that it was right before Thoroughbred.
And when was the Philo bankruptcy and you've taken over and ultimate purchase of them? That was in the 80s, wasn't it?
84.
Okay. Did you think, even before Thoroughbred or in connection with Mary McCaslin, did you ever say to yourself, you are we signing these folky singer-songwriter?
No, because in fact we were assigning any of them that we really liked anyhow. But we saw that we felt that there were more companies that were. I mean, we saw McCaslin. I think obviously not like Rachel Maya in terms of being on a major label and having, but we saw her as more a part of that kind of smooth, pretty style. And frankly, we liked people at Philo, and we all had to work there.
It was a nice way for us to funnel when we got all these tapes. We said,
Yeah.
instead of just rejecting it outright, say, I want to, check with Philo, they do things more along these lines.
It was 1973
Okay.
that first the council came out. I'll be back.
But I think it was more like around 74
That it did.
success
Right.
was happening. And that would explain why we were becoming a little bit more aware of promotional needs.
But a conscious sense, I mean, good relationship with Philo, a place for them to go in your own instance of what you wanted
Well,
to
see,
do.
and we were also either their very best distributor or one of their two
No,
best.
we were the best.
Yeah, we were their best distributor. Just as for many, many years we were Alligator Records' best distributor. And our Hoolies. Don't forget our Hoolie. Chris always, even though he had very eccentric ways of doing business, Chris was, we were his best distributor still. He didn't take returns, did he?
No, not initially. It might help to put in perspective how difficult it was getting into promotion when the people that we looked up to and that probably gave us an idea for the company were our Hooley and County and Folkways.
That's right.
You know, they're like the three least promotionally oriented labels that that were around that we knew of. I mean, that we know of, to this day.
Yeah.
And certainly County has changed, or at least you changed. But
However, if you look at Folkways and the presence that they have now, that they're owned by the Smithsonian, it's a very potent example of the importance of quality promotion.
Sure.
And we get tons and tons of press, but some of you were down partly because they put out such a small number of focused even reissues and repackage them, and have had a couple of strategic alliances, including the one with Columbia when this first bought them, that has really served them very well in terms of number one in the marketplace.
Well, from the standpoint, I can tell you that from the standpoint of a consumer of these albums, they have attained the sort of iconic status
Absolutely.
that has a cachet to it.
Yep.
And
Yep.
that's something
Which
that's
they
very
never-
hard to grasp.
which they never
I don't
would-
know that you can grasp it immediately as
Yeah.
your. It's something you do.
Yes.
It's like the glorification of the dead. It's like
Yeah.
And it's something that they never would have attained under Mo Ash.
Exactly. And it's well, why is in 1999 Phillips more popular than Tom Paxton, who's been out there? Why does Phillips have his box set?
No, but I don't think it's just because. What I'm saying is that if Mo were still alive and running the label, it's not just because of his being alive as opposed to dead. It's that also they have. I think they've done a good job in terms of positioning things in terms of publicity and with some of the choices that they've made with things that they put out, and they've been very selective.
I think they've dithered into the ground with another 10
Yeah.
years at it.
Yeah. Well, and he probably would have been engaged in lots of lawsuits too in the world of today. Yeah, and that's not a slap. That's not a criticism of him. It's just that, as we've said many times, it's a very different world of which we're doing business now than it was back then.
it seems like almost every other page in the Folkways book was somebody asking about royalties.
Right. Right.
It's a very recurring theme.
Yeah. Well, I was here. I think we had started this by saying what came out in the wake of Thorogood, as John was, Bill was saying there was. Well, 78.
Where do you want to look
He
at?
said 19 releases in the first 3 months of '78, and I didn't count them up, but a lot of them. I mean, what were
Yeah.
some of those? And it's kind of a sense of what were other efforts in
Well,
starting to break.
In January, there was the 2 volumes of old originals. Fiddle Tunes. Was that Tom Carter and two of the ex-Fuzzies. I think was mainly Tom Carter. Like Virginia old time music. 2 volumes.
Licensed, older licensed
No,
material,
no,
stuff
no.
you recorded.
New recording.
Now, did you guys do that?
No, Tom did.
Okay.
Tony Trishka, the first and only for us Bluegrass Cardinals,
Who were one of the groups that we thought might be big on the Bluegrass Festival circuit, and who did have a lot of good, legitimate early Bluegrass credentials.
the Mike and Peggy Seeger 3-volume set. You mentioned that was our entrance to the children's market. We were talking about that the other day, 1978. And the Osborne Brothers licensed material from MGM.
That was really all in
No, that was just the straight Osborne.
That was the straight Osborne Brothers. Then shortly after that, the Sol Hoopy and the Allen Brothers and the first Pierre Ben
is the one
Suzanne.
guitar. And who else did you say?
Pierre Ben Suzanne.
No, in between.
Allen Brothers.
Oh, Allen Brothers were Red Allen's sons.
You can
from
see how
our
this
state.
surrogate success totally distorted our release schedule.
Yeah, Joey Beaton and J.D. Crows, You Can Share My Blanket,
Well, they were
Nimrod Workman.
They were
Seems like we went the other way.
Well, I think that, in fact, you did, which sounds sort of charming in retrospect. Unfortunately, the times back then would permit people to have that kind of incorrigibility. I think that these days
Well, those really were albums that were already in production for the
Yeah,
most part before the Thoroughgood one came out.
It's premature to say that it was a response.
If
to
you looked
Thoroughgood.
if you looked at sometime in the early '80s,
That's
when
right.
both albums had been out and so forth, that would be, maybe a better way to.
Well, did we discuss the flying fish thing with Bruce?
I did some dividing up albums.
Yeah,
and stuff
What do
like
you
but
that.
we went for the most
Okay.
traditional. He went
Right.
for the things that would sell and
Bill's
did,
talking about that.
and probably outsold our stuff by 5-1 or some ridiculous thing. But we kept going for the guys who, if it were a baseball team, would have stayed in the minor leagues
Right.
sales wise forever.
But don't forget, even though it would appear to be that way superficially, for only a short time was it really like that. We were the ones who wound up with the George Thorogood record, which none of our other peers, whether it was Bruce Kaplan or Bruce Lauer at Alligator started themselves before,
Ever had that kind of success?
ever had that kind of success. Although they had different kind of success with some other records that we also would have certainly liked to have had.
Pedro Padilla, Tasty Lips, the
It
Rio
doesn't help to
Grande
just say
Band.
the names, you have
Yeah.
to say what they are.
Yeah.
too.
Not necessarily, no.
Pedro
Everyone is.
Padilla is Latin American,
Puerto Rican.
Puerto Rican folk music. And what did you say after Pedro Padilla?
Rio Grande Band was a Western swing band from
It didn't happen
National.
very big. Tasty Lips, which was a contemporary bluegrass band at that period.
How did Pierre Benchison come to you? That record? How did that thing?
Through Bill Keith,
Uh-huh.
who spent a lot of time over in France. He actually played on, I think, a little bit of the record. Too, but he spent a lot of time in France, married a woman from France, too, and
She was French.
he knew of Pierre from
Okay.
those circles, and he ended up licensing that album.
Okay, did he record it in Europe?
Yeah,
Did we import that label still?
I don't think so. He
I
imported
thought
that
we did.
record.
Did,
I
yeah.
thought so
Maybe
too.
it-
Solar Line.
Sold them to the crew.
Seems to be it.
And again, you're getting away there, hardly American roots. Was it just an interesting acoustic expression? What motivates something like that, given what you're doing?
We weren't exclusively interested in American roots even from the beginning, because the Biconte record
Right.
was
Talk about that.
in the West African core of music, and even though Mark Kibar was the person who recorded it, we thought it was really exciting and the record out. So it was more a certain, and I don't mean aesthetic in the narrow sense, I just mean it was music that had some sort of traditional references.
We put out a Martin Carthy album or two by that time. We put out one around the same month as George Thorogood.
Right.
Yep.
First album.
Who was in what the original? What was the band? The Albion String Band, if you recall? Yeah. Anyhow, one of the the Fairport Convention era
Sure.
big folk rock bands, and he was had a solo career by that point, but he was one of the sort of icons of guitar.
Kind of things that we got talked into that we really didn't know as much about.
I would think. Yeah.
But other people that were enthusiastic were saying, it's a great record, you should put this out, and so forth. And, sometimes it was not impossible to talk us into that kind of thing.
Bill Keith, you had a trusting and long association, let's say.
Well,
think that we can
maybe
rely
not
on.
a long one in particular, but we certainly, we had done his first album by that point, and we knew of him from his time with Bill Monroe and stuff from before that. So
Respected
certainly
his
we
opinion, but
respected,
shortly
yeah.
after Pierre's first record came out, it was not terribly dissimilar from, he played at Cassine, and in fact, from the first time he played there, he was such a little cutie pie back then that he had irresistible numbers of female funky bands. So, it really was, in a lot of respects, And even in the case of someone like a Martin Carthy, it's not like we really needed to, even though it was not the three of us, it was a little farther afield from our personal interests. We had, for example, someone working for us who was very into, and Scott was too at that time, kind of out or avant-garde jazz. So as a distributor, we imported, for example, the Black Saint label, and that same person who worked for us and was our imports buyer for a while was also a real specialist on English and Celtic folk music, and we imported a lot of the labels that carried the groups that at that time. It's almost like a chip for a circuit of Celtic music these days, because back then there was a very big circuit. Now there really isn't, and those groups are sort of the dinosaurs, because it's more the folk rock bands from Ireland who are big now. But back in those days, both Ireland and Ireland had a whole sort of folk rock kind of contingent going after the 60s folk revival. It was very analogous to what we were doing, and we knew that even though it wasn't our personal taste, and we felt it was compatible with our personal taste. That plus, to varying degrees, I think that we didn't ever consider that Rounded was just to be something that was a reflection of our personal taste.
I'm going to have to take off about now.
About now?
Yep.
Okay, I'm going to take off.
Ken and I'll continue.
Okay. Talk to me about the decision to form your first affiliated label, which I guess was that Heartbeat, the reggae label? Whatever.
I think it might have been Barrett.
Okay. Why? You were so eclectic. It didn't seem to matter for a long, long time, and then suddenly you formed the first of numerous.
There's a kind of evolution. There
Yeah.
definitely are a number of reasons or a number of things that fed into that. I think that the first one, though, may have been Varick. And I think in the case of Varick, in fact, something that Ken pointed out earlier, or Bill, about not wanting to sign the Nighthawks, who recorded for Adelphi Records, which we also distributed out of Washington, D.C., who were, at that point, in terms of where George Thorogood and the Delaware Destroyers came from, Nighthawks were from D.C. suburbs. And both sort of, in some ways, addressed a similar audience and played the same clubs. And when the Destroyers started out, the Nighthawks were far and away bigger in terms of record sales. And they were, as I said, on Adelphi. Well, something happened, and eventually Adelphi sort of was no longer working with the Nighthawks for one reason or